what we really specialize in and help people on the tax side establish the tax residency. But more and more, what we're seeing, which is really both interesting and really a positive sign for the country, is a lot of people are saying, hey, I want to do the tax. I want to set up the residency so I have that benefit. And then they come there thinking, hey, I'm going to come for a short trip, 3 days, and leave a tax resident. They're saying, hey, I really like this place. And they're deciding to either stay or leave home and then come back. And they're actually using Paraguay as the place they want to live.
Let's break it down to people, Jerz. What are actually the steps to become a resident in Paraguay, and how people can become a resident?
They don't require you to own a business or really demonstrate significant ties at all to the country. They require, in most cases, 2 things. They require a birth certificate and they require a clean criminal record.
Why Paraguay right now is a smart move compared to Dubai, Malta, Cyprus?
So Paraguay at the moment is the only country in the world that allows you to establish a tax residency without any physical presence. So what happens now, a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of people, the whole idea behind the space is they want the flexibility to do what they want when they want. And with all of these other countries you mentioned, they do have good tax residencies. But the problem is you're tied to the country for a fixed period of time per year, usually between 3 and 6 months. Once you have the permanent residence, it's 1 day every 3 years. Other than that, you don't need to spend any time in the country unless you want to.
Crypto investor, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm a nomad, I'm working online. How can I benefit from this?
So long as they spend no more than 6 months in another high tax jurisdiction. And then when that cedula is ready, we're able to pick it up through a power of attorney that you sign during the process. So it's basically the power of attorney that allows us to get the cedula for you at a later time on your behalf. And it allows you to only come 1 time.
Welcome back to another episode of The Jerz Way, where you build your freedom around your own rules. Today, we're going to be speaking with Jerz. He's just back from Paraguay. And today in this episode, we're going to be speaking where he stayed, what he ate, why he went to Paraguay, and specifically why Paraguay could be also your future tax flag in 2025. And if you're looking for a podcast to know more about to have your own way, your own rules, and live a life full of freedom, please stay with us. Let's go with Jerz today. Welcome.
Thanks as always, Gabby, and excited to talk about a subject that's very near and dear to my heart, which is Paraguay.
That's excellent. So let's start with that. How was your trip in Paraguay?
It was excellent. I go to Paraguay usually every month or two. We are processing about 10 to 20 residencies per month in Paraguay now. And I really enjoy the country. Every time I go there, I almost surprise myself, even though I go so frequently, how much I actually like the country. It's really a relaxed place, but it has a really good vibe, a really good feel. So every time I come back from the country, I'm like, wow, this is a place I could see myself in the future spending more and more time.
What surprised you the most in this trip?
I think every trip I am surprised by how fast the country is growing and how fast the country is developing, specifically Asunción. The first time I went to Paraguay was actually way back in 2008. And you talk about a place that was undeveloped, underdeveloped. There was literally nothing there. Even the capital city felt like a small rural town, and my experience at the time was more Mexico, a little bit in Argentina, but it felt like a very rural small town, even though we're talking a capital city.
Right.
And now every time I go back, I'm just amazed. There's another half dozen high rises which seem to have gone up overnight since the last time I was there. New restaurants, new shopping malls. This trip especially, I explored some of the little side streets, and I was amazed at the amount of cafes, restaurants that I had never seen, never explored before, that are sort of out of the expat bubble of Shopping del Sol, Paseo de Galeria. It gives it much more of a cosmopolitan, almost European feel to have these little like sidewalk cafes just out of nowhere, it seems. And I was very impressed by the food, actually, as I always am.
And it was not at that time in 2008, zero.
There was nothing. There were no shopping centers. There were no high rises. It was you had some beautiful houses, especially in Yakisati, which is one of the wealthier areas. It was the same thing. Those houses were there back then, but there was nothing else. You had no large supermarkets, at least not that I saw. It was the little corner markets. Think a rural Latin American town, a pueblo as they call it. That's what the capital city felt like in 2008.
Wow. It's the very first time I personally know someone who has ever been in Paraguay, which is Jerz. Actually was one of the very first person, because even living in Latin America, it's very rare to hear someone who has ever traveled to Paraguay. And being back in 2008, wow, that's another level of expertise from your side.
It is, and there were many years I didn't go back to Paraguay, but then in the 2020s, as I started doing business there, started going back there, helping people with the residencies. First, to see that initial change from, say, the early 2020s, comparing that to 2008, but then just in these last few years, to see the growth, to see the amount of foreigners that the country's attracting now. Even within, I would say, the last 6 months to a year, it's amazing the amount of expats, foreigners you see walking down the streets now. You hear all the different languages. It's much more international. Whereas, even a few years back, you didn't see so many foreigners, and most of the foreigners you saw back then were Brazilians, who they were probably the first on a mass scale to realize the benefits of doing the residency there. But now, Americans, Canadians, Australians, and then just all the different Europeans. So you hear all the different languages. You hear German. You turn around. You hear Dutch. It's very common, and that makes it just the international crowd, the people, make it feel like a much more cosmopolitan city than it was even a handful of months ago.
What it's interesting what you're saying is that if you ask someone in Latin America, in Colombia, in Mexico, in El Salvador, what is the capital of Paraguay? Nobody will tell you.
No.
It's a hidden gem.
Absolutely, it's a hidden gem. In fact, a lot of times when I tell people, especially from the United States, I'm in Paraguay or I'm going to Paraguay, they've never even heard of the country. Mm-hmm. Or maybe they've heard of it, but they know nothing. Where is that? Is that in South America? People just don't know. So yes, it's very much still a hidden gem. It's very much undiscovered. And I think what we really specialize in, and we do so much of, is help people on the tax side, help them establish the tax residency. But more and more, what we're seeing, which is really both interesting and really a positive sign for the country, is a lot of people are saying, "Hey, I want to do the tax. I want to set up the residency so I have that benefit." And then they come there thinking, "Hey, I'm going to come for a short trip, 3 days, and leave a tax resident." They're saying, "Hey, I really like this place." And they're deciding to either stay or that leave, go home, and then come back. And they're actually using Paraguay as the place they want to live, as either their primary base or one of their bases. And I think that's a very positive direction, and it says a lot about where the country is headed and the future. I think it's very positive for Paraguay.
Speaking about that, where did you stay?
So I have an apartment in Santa Teresa, which is a couple blocks walking to both Paseo de Galeria and Shopping del Sol. In my opinion, that's the best part of the city. It's very central. It has all the modern amenities that you could possibly I can get to dozens of the cafes I'm talking about are at the shopping centers. They're very good restaurants. Anything I want to buy, world-class supermarkets. That's another thing that it no longer surprises me, but I think it surprises a lot of people when they go there. The supermarkets you'll find in Asuncion are better than not just any other supermarket you'll find in Latin America. They're better than on a par with anything in the United States and with Europe. Same thing. Like think like an El Corte Inglés in Spain or a Whole Foods in the United States. These supermarkets are at least of equal quality, if not surpassing. And of course, the prices are still very low in Asuncion in Paraguay.
And do you recommend to people who are setting up their tax residency there, like how long do you think they can stay in that area?
Well, it depends. If you're just coming for a short visit, I think that's definitely the area you want to stay in. If your plan is to come for a few days a week to do the residence. If you say, hey, I want to make Paraguay my home, I want to make it at least a base, I still think that's probably the best area to live in. Although there are a couple of Vilamora, a couple additional areas that people might want to check out. And I'm finding there are two types of people who are deciding to come and stay in Asuncion. The first type is usually the entrepreneur. They tend to be younger. They're looking to network. They're looking to find other like-minded people. And for those people, 100% this is the best area. The other group of clients that we work with a lot are more your survivalists, the people who want to set something up on a piece of land, off the grid, far out. And for this group of people, yeah, probably that more congested area is not what they're going to look for. They're going to want something likely outside of Asuncion in the country. And you can get great farmland with access to river, running water for less than $20,000 an acre. So really the pricing and what the country has to offer really makes it attractive to both groups of people I just mentioned.
And what do you like the most around Paraguay? Food, the culture, the flavor of freedom, a mix of everything?
It's a mix of everything. I think it definitely has a flavor of freedom. It feels a lot to me like smaller cities in the U.S. in the 80s, 90s. For example, I went to university for a while in Arizona, in Tucson, which the city's grown a lot. But back then, I went in the 90s, in the early 90s, it was a similar sized city to what Asuncion is today. And ironically, Asuncion today feels a lot like Tucson, Arizona in circa 1992, 1993 in that area. You can just you can feel the freedom. You want to carry a gun. You want a government that's just sort of off your back and leaves you alone. Limited regulations. You really get that feel, even in a very short visit. You just you feel that freedom. And then beyond that, really surprisingly good food. Everybody talks about the steaks. I would say it's right up there with Argentina, Brazil, places that are known to have really good quality of meat. You'll find the same thing in Asuncion and for a fraction of the price. But beyond steaks, there are a lot of other healthy options there. There's, restaurants that serve good wraps and salads. Asian, which is very surprising, is people who live in Latin America know, with the exception of, like sushi and Japanese in Sao Paulo and a few other sort of random places throughout Latin America, the Asian food's terrible in general in Latin America. But Asuncion has a couple really good Asian restaurants, authentic, that I would say are as good as the Asian restaurants I frequent when I go to San Francisco, which is saying a lot.
Right.
So you have a variety of different international cuisines. So it's a very unique place, and it's becoming more and more well-rounded. Another thing that comes to my mind is shopping. Probably, when you think what's a good place in the world to shop, Asuncion, Paraguay doesn't come to your mind. But ironically,
The tariffs.
exactly, now with the tariffs coming, a lot of items which I think before I probably would have gone to the US, ordered on Amazon, and then sort of smuggled back in my suitcases to Latin America. More and more, I'm just going to start buying stuff in Asuncion. You have U.S.-style malls with U.S.-style stores and U.S. pricing, which people know, on those name brands, things like Nike, Adidas, stuff that people are used to buying, prices that are equal or even a little bit lower than what you'll find in the U.S. now.
It's insane how the world just changed. It's for me surprising. All the possibilities now are in Latin America. When once people used to avoid it, now we welcome people that wants to have freedom.
Yeah, I sort of the joke I use a lot. I say that the third world in a lot of ways is now moving towards the first world. So the first world's becoming a lot more third world, and the third world is becoming a lot more first world. So you have an equalization, and it's a fascinating time to sort of see how this will all shake out. But there's a lot of change coming, and I think part of that change is you're going to see, the traditional first world countries like the United States, like Canada, a lot of European countries are seeing a real decline in standard of living, in what you can buy and how much things cost, the quality of life. And at the same time, you're seeing that improve greatly in these Latin American countries like Paraguay. I think Paraguay is just a shining example of potential and what can happen in a country where you have limited regulation and the government just allows the free market and people to do their things and function.
Let's break it down to people, Jerz. What are actually the steps to become a resident in Paraguay, and how people can become a resident?
Okay, great question. And it's a remarkably simple process. So unlike a lot of countries, Paraguay doesn't require income documents. They don't require you to own a business or really demonstrate significant ties at all to the country. They require, in most cases, two things. They require a birth certificate and they require a clean criminal record. And you will have to get both those documents from your home country or the country where you've lived for the last 3 years. In the case of the criminal certificate, you'll have to have both those documents apostilled, and then you have to come to Paraguay with your original documents for a few days. That's it.
So just to break it down and summarize, two things: birth certificate, criminal record, and both apostle. That's it. And what? Sorry.
And yep, absolutely. That is it. Just those two documents and a couple of days in Paraguay. Everything else, translations, we take care of the rest of the process. That's one of the things that differentiates us. The actual steps you have to take once you come to Paraguay are actually quite complicated. But the beauty of our process is you're not going to have to even know what those steps are. You simply come with your documents. We ask that you send us electronic copies ahead of time so we can translate, put everything into the system, and you'll come. We will drive you around to a few different offices. You have to go to Interpol. You have to go to another police station. You have to go to identifications. You have to go to migrations. 4 or 5 different offices. We take you around. We bring you to the front of the line so you don't have to wait that much. We get your fingerprints taken, and we get everything done. It's basically just sign here, and we walk you through the process. We even drive you around. We take all thought, all effort out of the process on your part. Just show up in Asunción for a couple of days with your documents, and we'll take care of everything else.
And why Paraguay right now is a smart move compared to Dubai, Malta, Cyprus?
So Paraguay at the moment is the only country in the world that allows you to establish a tax residency without any physical presence. So what happens now, a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of people, the whole idea behind this space is they want the flexibility to do what they want when they want. And with all of these other countries you mentioned, they do have good tax residencies. But the problem is you're tied to the country for a fixed period of time per year, usually between 3 and 6 months. So that means, like in the case of Dubai, you have to spend 3 or even 4 months per year in that country. And if you don't, you will lose the tax residency status. In Paraguay, that's not the case. Paraguay, you have to come for the few days, which I already mentioned, to set up the temporary residence. You'll have to come back again for the same number of days at the start of year 3, or right before year 3, so at the end of the 2 years. You need to come back for a couple more days. And then beyond that, once you have the permanent residence, it's 1 day every 3 years. Other than that, you don't need to spend any time in the country unless you want to. More and more people want to, as I'm saying, but you don't have to. You aren't tied to the country. And that is really what sets Paraguay apart from these other countries.
So this question comes along a lot on your social media that say always, I'm a crypto investor, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm a nomad, I'm working online. How can I benefit from this?
A person who works online or is an investor in the crypto space, investments, whatever the case might be, can benefit from this sort of setup so long as they spend no more than 6 months in another high tax jurisdiction. So somebody who's French and living in Paris and says, hey, I love living in Paris, I want to continue living here year round, this setup is not going to benefit them in the same way it's going to benefit somebody who has the flexibility to only live in Paris for 6 months. They can do 6 months in Paris, they can do 6 months in London, something like that, and this setup works perfectly for them. But somebody with business, residency, everything, family, tied to a high tax jurisdiction where they don't have the flexibility to leave the tax system and leave that physical residency, this setup in and of itself isn't going to be a complete solution for them.
So basically they can say goodbye to 30 to 60% of taxes.
Absolutely, if they're able to spend less than 6 months in that high tax jurisdiction.
And it is possible to do this in one trip to Paraguay to become a tax resident?
It is. There's a lot of misinformation out there about what's possible and what's not. Currently, as of the filming of this video, we are still able to do it in a single trip. So all of the trámites, which is like the Spanish word for the government errands that you have to do to complete the process, can be done at the same time. So basically, we can apply for the cédula at the same time as you do the other documents for your residency. And then when that cedula is ready, we're able to pick it up through a power of attorney that you sign during the process. So it's basically the power of attorney that allows us to get the cedula for you at a later time on your behalf, and allows you to only come one time to get the residency.
We have a lot of crypto investors listening to your podcast, and also a lot of entrepreneurs who are willing to pay anything just to get rid of the tax system because they feel suffocated. We have a lot of clients that actually comes to us and explain that they are not able to even live in Malta because of what is currently happening in their administration, or in Cyprus, or their offshore structures that they do have are no longer working. The trading company in London is no longer be able to be connected with the Cayman Islands. These high net worth individuals actually ask, okay, why Paraguay is the best type of solution for me? It's just different than setting up an offshore company. What's the benefit?
The problem for a high net worth individual, they need to look at two different things. They need to look at their business structure, and they need to look at their personal tax setup or structure. So in the end, it's all about the complete structure when you combine those two different elements. And a lot of people just look at one element versus the other. So yes, you can set up an offshore company, an offshore trading company, something like that. You can leave a lot of your net worth in there. You want to take it to another level. You can put all of that inside of some sort of trust we work with a lot, or a Panamanian foundation, something like that. But the problem is, at some point, you're going to want to take your wealth and you're going to want to spend some of it. And at the time you take money out of that business, out of that trust, out of that foundation, it's going to be subject to taxation based on where your tax residency is. And that's really where Paraguay comes in. It makes sense to set up that personal fiscal residence, even if you don't need it today, because at some point in the future, you're likely going to want to take money from some of these structures. And if you don't have that set up, it's very likely, if you're spending a lot of time in a high tax country, or perhaps the country where you have citizenship, would then come back at you and say, no, you don't have anything else set up. We're entitled to take a big piece of those crypto gains or investment income. So that's why it really makes sense for the high net worth individuals to look beyond just setting up the trust, beyond just setting up the offshore business, and also setting up a personal fiscal tax residency. And for that, there's no better country in the world than Paraguay at the moment.
I just learned, Jerz, that nowadays countries can deliver visas or can provide access to their system if you don't come from a sensitive nationality. More and more people coming from Cuba, Venezuela, India, Qatar, Pakistan, Iran, right? I'm included there. We are considered sensitive nationalities. And those punishments, even if we are doing our businesses in Colombia, in the US, those are punishments from governments, okay? How can you manage those situations? For example, a Canadian entrepreneur who was born in Iran, in Qatar, in Russia, in Ukraine, in those conflict situations, you handle a lot of this, and I want you to tell us.
Yes, so they're really they're two different parts to that. You have, in Latin America especially, they're called sensitive nationalities. So the majority of countries don't require tourist visas to come to a country like Paraguay. For all of those nationalities, Europeans, Americans, Canadians, Australians, the process is what I've laid out. It's very straightforward. However, let's say you're an Indian national, a Nigerian national, you're from Iraq, like somebody I was talking to this morning. It's not so straightforward to just be able to show up in Paraguay and get the residency, because they consider your nationality to be sensitive, and the process becomes much more difficult. The first thing to look at, that I always look at in these cases, is do you have another citizenship? So we'll take it as two parts. For those that do not have another citizenship, if you're an Indian national, you only have an Indian passport, I don't have the best news. It's not going to be easy. Using the regular process, in fact, they won't do it. In most cases, regardless of the net worth. I've worked with a couple very high net worth Indian nationals, and regardless of the assets they were able to show, they couldn't even get a tourist visa to come to Paraguay to start the process. Really, the only possibility for these individuals is going to be an investment in Paraguay. Paraguay does offer, it's called the SOS program. It requires an investment of roughly 80,000 US dollars. And if you're willing to do that, there's a possibility. I'm not going to say it's an easy situation, but there's a possibility, if you only have a sensitive nationality, of being able to do this and getting residency in the country. For those individuals who were simply born in one of these countries and have acquired another nationality, it's very possible to do it using more or less the same process. If you're able to get your original birth certificate and have it apostilled, it's much easier. But a lot of times it's impossible to get a birth certificate from India, or especially if you're from Syria or one of these countries that has had a lot of conflicts.
It happened to me with the Venezuelan.
Yeah, Venezuela is another example. It's almost impossible to get the birth certificate. So in these cases, in lieu of the birth certificate, we can often use a nationality or citizenship certificate. So what the Paraguay government wants to see is basically a piece of paper, again, it will have to be apostilled, that says you were given citizenship on this date, you were born on this date in this country, and ideally the certificate says how you got the nationality. So, you got it through descent, or you got it because you'd lived here for 5 years. The big thing, again, is they want to see that 3 years. So they want to see you've had the nationality for 3 years and that everything lines up. But in these cases, we have a very, very high success rate of being able to help the clients and get them the residency, even if they don't have the original birth certificate.
Amazing. I'm really proud of your work. You have helped a lot of people.
Thank you.
Let's go with the other question. So we are speaking about all of these problems, and people might think that this is just for wealthy people, or just for people who has businesses, or just freelancers. Do you think this is true, just to think about the tax, to get out of the tax system that they are currently?
I think obviously it's going to make sense for high net worth individuals who have the flexibility to take the steps we've been talking about. For younger people, or people who don't have the net worth or the income, you have to look at the situation. I'm not somebody who's going to say it makes sense for everybody. If you're starting out, you're struggling, you're trying to build the net worth, a lot of times I say, hey, it makes more sense to stay wherever you are and focus on building, on making more money so you can get to the next level. I definitely don't recommend, if you have $500 saved and nothing else and no job and no way to make online money, getting on a plane and coming to Paraguay and figuring it out. I think that is not a very good idea. But a lot of our clients are younger, what you'd call digital nomads now, who maybe have remote income, not a lot, but maybe they're making $50,000-$60,000 a year. And yes, and in that case, it can absolutely make more sense. A lot of these individuals are actually moving to Paraguay. And for them, they can come, let's say you have a Canadian citizen. Well, living in Canada, $50,000-$60,000 a year, you're really going to be struggling, especially paying close to half of that in tax, plus the higher cost of living. So you come to Paraguay, you save probably 75-80% on the cost of living, and then you're also saving another 30 to 50% on the taxes. It can absolutely make sense and help you help you build that foundation, so you're able to invest. You're able to buy Bitcoin, crypto, whatever it is, and get to that next level. So it absolutely can make sense for certain individuals.
I had the opportunity to be with you in a dinner that you allowed me to be there with a client who said like he couldn't be thankful enough to have found your profile on Twitter, because he was 22, 23, I think. And he asked you about how to get the tax exit domicile in Canada. Then he moved to Paraguay. He was living in his parents' basement. Do
exactly.
You remember?
I remember. Exactly. Imagine. So you're 22 years old. Mm-hmm. You go from struggling, living in your parents' basement, working 12 hours a day when you factor in your hour-and-a-half commute each way, to coming to Asuncion, dating beautiful women, eating steaks at the high-end restaurants every night, and actually being able to still save more than half of your money. It's an upgrade like none other.
Right. I remember that guy still, because I was shocked to see his reality to my reality. Because, okay, we know that it's difficult to be independent at a certain point. But for me, in my mindset, it's like, wow, in Canada, you're supposed to have this freedom. You're supposed to be independent at that time, not to be living in your parents' basement. And listening that from a Canadian citizen, wow, it was shocking. It was not the reality. They sold me as a marketing, because I'm a good guys. We receive a lot of marketing to go and live in Canada, so it's interesting.
It is. So the perception of so many Latinos is that the United States represents this freedom. Canada, it represents the opportunity, the way to get to the next level. And that's a whole nother podcast we can do about whether that's really the case anymore. I would tend not to agree. But today, what we're seeing is really the migration the other way. It's people who supposedly have that opportunity, that privilege, because they were born with the U.S., the Canadian, the European passport. But these individuals are actually living the LATAM dream now. They're choosing to immigrate into Latin America because Latin America offers them a better quality of life. And more in my business, that's who we're working with, and that's what we're seeing. People who are able to come to these countries and live a better life.
I have a question. What do your clients say after they set up this tax residency?
Great question. I think a lot of people say, why didn't I do this sooner? I didn't realize how easy it was, and I didn't realize this was possible, and I really wish I had done this sooner. More than anything, we get that statement from the high net worth individuals, because a lot of them, because they've been making good money for a number of years, they've read about some of this, they've explored it, they've thought about it for years, but they never bothered to set it up to go through the process. And once they did it, it's like, this light bulb's gone off. It's like, gee, why didn't I take the opportunity to do this many years before? I always have a saying, the best time to do this is yesterday. because thinking about it and waiting really isn't going to get you to where you want to be.
Excellent about to hear that. And also what people do or say after they left Dubai, because you're receiving more and more people leaving those places.
Yeah, so I would say a few years ago, we had so many inquiries, and the tendency in this space was people wanting to move to Dubai setup, Dubai residency. That was the buzz. And now it's reversed, and we're getting a lot of people who set up the Dubai residency, whether it was through us or through somebody else, who've been there for a few years, and they're saying, no, this isn't for me. This isn't what I want. And we're seeing a lot of these individuals now looking at Paraguay, looking at Panama, because in the end, they find the Dubai lifestyle is very limiting. One point we already touched on, which is you have to spend 3 or 4 months there, and they may not want to do that. But beyond that, they find, if you're somebody who's a freedom-minded individual, yeah, Dubai's shiny and has these pretty buildings, but it's really not a free place. There's really nothing free about it. And so more and more, I think the Dubai people are looking for other options. And one thing is, I think a big sales pitch for Dubai was the networking. You're able to build your network. You're able to be around these high net worth, these high impact people, and that attracted a lot of people to the UAE, to Dubai, and now people are waking up and saying, oh, I can find this in other countries. Yes, of course, Paraguay is not going to be as developed, but over time it will get there. And as far as networking, as far as that sort of energy, they are able to find it to an extent in other places like Paraguay.
That's what you found in this last trip.
I really did. So in this last trip, I spent a lot of time networking and talking to people who have either made Paraguay their permanent base, or at the very least made it one of their bases. And every time I go there, but especially this last time, I was just, it really made an impression on me, how positive and forward thinking these people are about the future of the country and the opportunity, everything from networking to investment, and the opportunities that building these ties to Paraguay offer.
I have a question. What could attract between two clients that are deciding whether Dubai, Panama, and Paraguay, right? Let's say that you're an European that wants to leave the system or have a sensitive nationality. Mm-hmm. Dubai could be the place for sensitive nationalities, maybe not. Maybe they don't like that hustle experience. Maybe they are tired of that. What's the best case scenario for this European or Canadian person in those three concepts?
I think it really comes down to looking at that person's lifestyle and what the goals of the specific situation are. I think it's going to be different from person to person. For some people, Dubai is the right place. For others, Panama makes a lot of sense. Panama, we'll do another podcast about it, but it has great proximity to the United States, to Canada. It has great international connections. So there are a lot of benefits to each of these places. But for the person who doesn't want to be tied to another country, you can't do better than Paraguay. For that person, Paraguay is the no-brainer.
And Paraguay will be just only one flag for the tax purpose, right? There's more flags according to the flag theory.
According to the flag theory, so it depends. I mean, you can set up more than one flag in Paraguay, but in most cases, what you're going to want to do is use that as your fiscal flag. meaning that's going to be your country of your tax residency. That's going to be where you pay taxes. But in most cases, you're going to have a citizenship somewhere else. You're going to have a business structure somewhere else. You're going to keep your money somewhere else. You're going to earn your money somewhere else. So you try to separate all those different things, because the separation gives you one freedom, but it also, the diversification gives you protection. It makes it a lot harder for a government or a person or a business to take something from you if everything's spread out amongst many countries.
Excellent. And that is what you're the king.
That's really what we specialize in. I think a lot of people in this space, and especially with Paraguay, there are other good companies out there that can offer you a residency in Paraguay. But I think we're really probably the best, if not the only one, who uses Paraguay as part of your overall structure. Our interest isn't in selling you a residency and thanks, good luck. Our purpose, our mission is to build the entire structure for your sovereign plan, for your lifestyle. And this plan is going to be custom built around you. It's not something that's going to be sort of this cookie cutter. This is the best plan for everybody. There are other companies that I can think of out there that do sort of try to sell cookie cutter plans. That's not us. Our mission is really to listen, to understand your needs and your wants, and build the best possible lifestyle structure and plan for you. Now, often Paraguay will come into this, and it will be a big part of the plan. But just a residency is just a residency. It's ultimately a piece of paper without the rest of the stuff. And that's what I always encourage people. If you're talking to other providers out there, talking to other companies who do Paraguay residency, find out what they're going to do for you. Find out what their price includes as far as the residency goes, but also find out what else they'll do for you beyond. Will they help you with banking? Because I can tell you right now, you're not going to want to bank in Paraguay. So how does all of this fit together? And that's really the important piece of the puzzle.
And in Paraguay, you are able to receive US dollar in case if they open a business formation, right?
Yeah, so Paraguay, as I mentioned, it doesn't have the best banking, but it is fairly easy to receive both guaranis, which is the local currency, and dollars. Foreign credit cards are accepted without problem. The machines work better there than probably anywhere in Latin America. I've never had an issue getting my cards accepted. There are a lot of ATMs. The ATMs don't block foreign cards, and a lot of them allow you to get both guaranis or dollars. So if you have a few debit cards, it's certainly possible to withdraw, a few $1,000s a day between the debit cards and access money really easily.
That's very, that's good to know, because people actually can go and also know that they don't have the restriction, even like Colombia, that you go to an ATM and you have this restriction with the currency sometimes, or the blockage, because
the debit cards, I would say, the biggest problem you'll probably encounter is a lot of the actual machines run out of money. Mm-hmm. So, worst case, you're going to put your card in and it's going to say it's out of money and you've got to go find a new one. But especially in the areas we mentioned where most of you will be spending time, it's not an issue to find a new ATM machine. I'll briefly touch on the banking again, because I think that's an important thing for people to realize. In general, Paraguay is not a great banking destination, even with the residency. So if you're actually going to live and use it as one of your bases, it probably makes sense to open up an account. It helps you pay, your phone bill, your electricity bill, things like that. makes it convenient. A lot of the shopping, a lot of the businesses give discounts if you pay with the local cards, and the discounts can be substantial, 30, 40, 50%. Supermarkets do that. Even places like Nike do that. So it can make sense to open up the local bank accounts for that reason, just sort of for some daily spend within the country. The problem is if you're actually trying to transfer money to a bank account, international transfers are notorious for getting blocked. Even at what we would consider very small amounts, say $1,000, they will likely block and may not accept. And it's a big pain in the ass, especially if you're not in the country. So for actually storing money as a like offshore banking destination, Paraguay is not it. For most of our clients, what we do is we set up Panama banking to sort of complement the Paraguay structure. So if you want access to Latin American banking, it's usually Panama, secondarily Uruguay, which is also excellent. But other than those two countries, I generally do not recommend banking in any Latin American country except for some day-to-day spend.
To wrap up this episode, just to do a summarize for clients as well, or potential clients, it's to have, what are the two documents again?
So the two documents you need are the birth certificate and the criminal record clearance, both apostilled. One other note, the birth certificate does not expire. The criminal certificate is valid for 6 months from the date of issue.
Okay, perfect. And the second also, which is very important, it's about the processing time there. They can just go for a few days.
Yes. In general, everything can be done in 1 to 2 days. That said, I usually recommend people to come for at least 3 to 4 business days or even a week. And the reason is this. Paraguay, despite all of the positives we've mentioned in this podcast, is still a developing country. So electricity goes out. Of course, as we just saw in Spain and Portugal, that happens everywhere now. But computer systems, there can be some minor delays. So sometimes I'll get a client and they'll say, I only have 1 day. Can you do it? And the answer is yes, except when we can't. So if you can, give yourself that extra day or two, just if something happens that's beyond our control. If the computer system of Interpool, our migrations is down because there's no electricity, even with connections and everything we can do, we're not going to be able to get around that. So that's why I always say give yourself a little buffer unless you can't. If you can't, just talk to us and we'll work with you and we'll do everything we can. But ideally, come for 3-4 days.
And this is not only for wealthy people, entrepreneurs. This is also for everyone who has a salary in a foreign exchange, in a foreign currency.
Yeah, I think anybody who has the flexibility to spend less than 6 months per year in a high tax country, this is a great solution for you.
Perfect. And the last thing also to mention that they can say goodbye to that 60% of taxes.
Absolutely. So in general, well, in some cases with just this setup, you'll be able to eliminate the taxes. For most, it'll be a little bit more complicated. We'll also have to set you up with banking, perhaps a business structure. A lot of times we use a US LLC. But again, it's creating that overall structure, which will allow most of you to get to 0%.
So in other words, if you're serious about plan A, plan B, and you're serious about this in 2025 or the next coming years, you don't require to live full-time there. You don't require to be attached to the tax jurisdiction you're living there. And what could be the most important?
Well, I think the most important is just the realization that we live in a world where you're no longer tied to the place you were born. So most people still live with like this old mindset that I was born here. This is my citizenship. This is where I was born. This is where I will live. And this is where I'll die. So for many of these individuals, it's like, okay, government says I pay 50% tax. I pay 50% tax. And I'm here to tell you that that's not necessarily true. There are a lot of options that are legal. We're not talking about doing anything illegal. We're not talking about tax evasion. We're talking about setting up structures that legally allow you to achieve 0% by combining business structures with fiscal tax residency, with banking, in some cases with other stuff. But, at a basic level, it's combining those three things: your business structure with your fiscal tax residency and your banking. And using those three things together, you can, in most cases, get to 0%.
Perfect. Let's wrap up this episode. And now that I'm understanding better about this, how to speak clearly to people, we can now plan your plan A, B, C, Z with Jerz and know that Paraguay is the move. And also that we're now doing on social media is that you can now set up a free consultation call with our team for 15 minutes to speak more about your situation, and Jerz will also take care of you. But if you also want more information about all that Paraguay, all this information that Jerz has for you, just write the word wealth on the DMs on social media, and we're going to be assisting you, which is now functional and it's working.
Absolutely. And you can reach out to us at any time. TheJerzWay.com is our website. We're on all of the social channels. I answer many of the DMs and questions myself, and reach out to us. We can get a lot of information during that introductory call, and we can really figure out if we're a good fit and if we're able to help you. One thing I can promise you, we're not going to waste your time or money. We're not trying to sell you something you don't need or won't benefit you. Our whole goal is to help you, and we'll be very upfront if we can help you or if we can't.
That's correct. So don't wait until the governments are doing more bureaucracy in your country, because then it could be too late. And always remember that the next move is the perfect one. And if you don't know how to do it, here's where you can find him too. Well, guys, thank you so much for watching this episode, and see you in the next one.
Bye, everyone.